What you see in front of you is a little arrangement that I've made using greenery from my garden. And I've also added a little tiny bit of color with some sedum and a little woodsy effect with different cones. So I thought I'd show you the finished product before I show you how I made it. So now I'm going to remove it. And so I put it on a turntable because it makes it easier to work with. The first thing I'm going to do is choose a container, and you can see this container, it's plastic, it's made for floral arranging, and it has little spikes in the bottom so that when we put the floral foam in there, it holds it snugly. And the floral foam is made, it's called Oasis, and you can see it's exactly the size of the container. And the floral foam is, what it is really is a sponge. And I cut it so when I'm doing an arrangement, it sits about 1 inch above the lip of the container. So it comes in a brick that's this long. I've already cut one part off to make the first arrangement. And now I'm going to cut the next section. And what I have here is some water. And when you're soaking the Oasis to get water inside of it, you just place it on top of the water and it gradually sinks down and it absorbs. If you push it into the water, you start to get air bubbles on the inside, and then it's not as effective in keeping the plants wet. So this Oasis is going to collect water all the way up. As the water's filling from the bottom, it's pushing the air out the top. And I'm just letting it take its time. And as soon as it's filled, and you can see now it's starting to come, starting on this corner, you can see it's starting to fill up. And eventually it will completely fill. I'm always wanting to be a little impatient with that part of it. So I'll tell you about the tools that I use. I have some pruners. I like these pruners because they're for bonsai, and they get in there and do little itty bitty pieces that you want to remove. So I've collected from my yard. This is Cryptomeria, and it's kind of a bushy plant. I've got some boxwood, which I'm always pruning off. It's available year-round. It never loses its leaves. And then I have a little bit of spruce, which has a bluish tinge on one side, which gives some contrast. And here I have some lime green cypress. And in my arrangement that I made earlier, those 4 items are predominating. So now we have the block of Oasis that's filled with water, and I'm going to just place it in there and push it down. And now it's a snug fit. If you didn't have a container like this and you still wanted to make an arrangement, you need to make it snug in some way. So what we usually do is use floral tape, and we tape over top of the Oasis to make sure that it's stable. It stays where we want it to be. This is a reusable container. Sometimes what I do is use containers that mushrooms come in. The only thing is that they're blue. So maybe I want to cover them with a piece of fabric just for fun. So this is green, this is green. Then we have greenery. So this is all the same shades. Whatever you're doing with one part of an arrangement, you do with the other. So I've trimmed some of the stems back on these. And what I'm going to show you is the start of this. So I'm putting a selection of boxwood in as my first go around. So whatever you do on one side, you do on the other. And sometimes we want an arrangement to be longer this way and shorter this way. So then it becomes a triangle. So after the first row, the second row goes on an angle a little bit more upward and on the corners. So I'm starting to fill in. So like I said, whatever you do on one side, you also do on the other. I can always snip this later if it gets out of balance. So now I'm going to use some filler, this fluffy cryptomeria. It's a lovely tree. It bends over almost to the ground when snow gets on it. And then I watch it over the next week after the snow's gone, it gradually comes back up again. It's about 20 feet tall now. And there's just a lovely tree in my garden. So you can see that the rotating turntable is doing a good job of me being able to see exactly where I've placed the different sprigs. I could put lots of this in just because it's a filler. So I started off with a basic form, and now I'm doing some filling. And here's a little bit of spruce. With its bluish tinge. I really like doing flower arranging. I find it very calming. I used to worry at first that I was not doing it perfectly, but I don't worry about that anymore because it's my arrangement. So while there are some rules of thumb to follow, you still can make it your arrangement. Now, something else that I might want to take into consideration is the height. So there's a rule of thumb that whatever height the container is, the foliage should be 1.5 times higher. That's a rule of thumb. Doesn't mean it has to be that way. So there's something that's about 1.5 times higher. I also have some laurel, which has a broader flat leaf, which can give a different texture. And it's also available year-round. I like having those type of plants in my yard that I can just go out and clip them whenever I need them. So some plants will be drooping and others will be upright. Some will be colorful. I like the contrast of the lime green. It just gives a little bit of a spark. I had trimmed all the base of each of these little sprigs so that it didn't hinder the needles. The needles didn't hinder going in. Whenever you're poking a branch into oasis, sometimes you get a branch that is a little bit bendy and fragile. So you want to make a hole for it to go into. You make the hole slightly smaller than what you're putting in. If you make it bigger, it's not going to make good contact with the oasis, and then you get an air bubble, and you don't want that. So this is starting to look symmetrical on all sides. If I was going to place this like on a mantle, I might want to elevate the whole thing while I'm doing it so that I get a good look at what it'll look like on the mantle. I also picked some holly today. It's a little bit prickly, but it is seasonal. So that would be something I might be able to put in. The trouble with the holly tree that I have is that the berries are 30 feet up, and I don't know how to get around that. So now I have some sedum, which is a little pop of color that I can place in here and there. So I still have a lot of that in my yard. And one of the things about sedum is that as it dries, it just goes darker and darker, and then it becomes a color that disappears. The color disappears, and it's just sort of brown, neutral. This is quite fun to do. And you can just make it your own. I like to work with woodsy things. So I might put a stick or a piece of driftwood into an arrangement. Like maybe I'd take a curly stick like this and place it down so it gives it some height and some added interest. And this one happens to have a little bit of moss on it. And then there's cones. You can do cones so that you are attaching the cone to a stick, and then the stick can be placed into the arrangement. And you can have them coming out at an angle, or you could have them upright. It's your choice. So I think I'll try that. And I also found these seeds. I don't know where they came from, probably Africa. And they're just added interest to pop them into a display. And they just sit there. And of course, with the cryptomeria, it's sort of spongy, and it lets you gather things around. Oh, there's another cone. I really like the turntable. So how are we looking on this? What else could I add? So it could be a cone that you put on, or you could wire it in place. Sometimes what I do is take the cone and attach it to a stem by just sliding it on the stem, and then it sticks there. Anyways, and sometimes I use little pieces of bark. This is starting to look pretty full now. Oh, there's the bark. You could put sticks in, pieces of driftwood, pieces of bark. Okay. So that was pretty simple to do. This one's a little bit bigger than the first one I showed you. So each one can be similar, but different. So there's 2 arrangements. And it didn't take very long to make.